Imagine this, right? You spend like 6 months just locked in your garage writing this brilliant piece of software,
Oh, yeah.
a completely revolutionary database tool, and you decide to be generous, so you put it out on the internet for free.
As you do.
Right. But then, a year later, you wake up and find out that some multi-billion-dollar tech giant is using your exact code to power their flagship cloud service.
Yeah, that's the classic horror story.
It really is. They were making an absolute fortune off your hard work. And they don't even have to, put your name in the credits, let alone pay you a single dime.
Right.
So you call a lawyer, assuming you've been completely robbed, but the lawyer looks at your project and just says, well, legally, they did absolutely nothing wrong.
Nothing at all.
And why? Because of a single, just one paragraph of legal text you pasted at the top of your code before uploading it?
It is literally the ultimate nightmare for a developer. And the crazy thing is, it happens way more often than people realize.
I bet.
Because software just doesn't operate by the rules of physical property, right? Like if you build a chair, you own it. If someone takes it, that's theft.
Plain and simple.
Exactly. But with code, people aren't just taking your chair. They're copying your blueprints, they're building their own giant furniture factories, and sometimes selling the results without you ever even knowing about it.
Man, that's wild. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today, our mission is to navigate this incredibly complex and honestly pretty intimidating world of software licensing.
It can be very intimidating.
Definitely. And we've got a massive stack of comprehensive notes here, comparison tables, historical legal cases, all detailing the exact rules, obligations, and legal protections of various open source licenses.
Right.
For this deep dive, I'm going to put myself in your shoes. I'm the developer who is staring at a new project, seeking practical advice on how to actually release it without getting burned.
And I'll be taking on the role of the licensing analyst because, the goal today isn't just to read you a list of rules like some dry textbook.
Please don't.
I won't, I promise. We want to distill this absolute alphabet soup of acronyms, GPL, MIT, Apache, AGPL. We want to turn that into actual actionable knowledge.
Exactly.
They're speaking directly to you, so you can protect your project's growth and your legal standing without needing to, go out and hire a whole legal team.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because before we get completely lost in the weeds of all these specific licenses, and I know there are a lot of them, I need you to give me the 10,000-foot view of the landscape.
Sure.
Because my understanding from the notes is that to make sense of any specific license, you first need to really grasp the two fundamental philosophical camps of sharing software.
That is definitely the best place to start. The entire open source world, it essentially splits right down the middle into two main categories. You've got permissive licenses on one side and copyleft licenses on the other.
Permissive and copyleft.
Right. Every single license we're going to dissect today falls into one of those two buckets. And the fundamental difference between them really just comes down to a trade-off.
What kind of trade-off?
It's about how much absolute freedom you're willing to give the person downloading your code versus, what obligations you want to force upon them if they do use it.
Okay, let me try an analogy here just to see if I have my head around the mechanics of this. Let's say sharing software is, it's like sharing a beloved family recipe.
Okay, I like food analogies.
Right. So is a permissive license basically me saying, hey, take my recipe, cook it in your commercial restaurant, make $1 million, just leave my name on the menu as the original creator?
Broadly speaking, yes.
Okay. And then is Copyleft saying, you can use my recipe, but if you invent a new variation, like say you figure out a way better spice blend, you are legally obligated to publish that new recipe for everyone else to use?
That's the basic idea, yeah.
But I have to push back a little here, though. Is the legal dividing line really that black and white in practice?
Well, the recipe analogy gets you halfway there, but the reality is it's much messier, mostly because of license compatibility.
Compatibility.
Yeah. It's not always black and white because developers rarely build software entirely from scratch anymore. They mix ingredients.
Right. They pull in different libraries.
Exactly. So if you take a software library with a permissive license and you mix it with a library under a strict copyleft license, you can create a literal legal explosion.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes those two licenses have completely contradictory requirements. Like, you might be legally required to open source a project by one license, but forbidden from doing so by the other.
Wait, seriously? So you accidentally build a product you legally cannot distribute at all?
It happens all the time. But let's look at the broad categories from our sources to understand why that happens. The first camp, the permissive licenses, includes famous ones like MIT, Apache, and BSD.
I've definitely heard of MIT.
Right. These are heavily favored by tools that want to become massive industry standards, like React, the huge web framework built by Facebook. That uses MIT.
Oh, okay.
These licenses are extremely free. You can use the code in closed-source products. You can use it in highly profitable commercial tools.
So my whole leave my name on the menu thing is actually pretty accurate for permissive. I give you the code, and you basically just have to acknowledge I wrote it.
Broadly, yes. You keep the copyright notice intact.
Yeah.
On the other side, though, we have the Copyleft camp.
Okay, the forced sharing cap.
Exactly. This includes the GPL, the AGPL, and the LGPL. Linux, the operating system that basically runs the entire internet, is famously licensed under the GPL.
That's a huge one.
It is. Now, Copyleft still absolutely allows you to use and modify the software for free, but it comes with a strict, almost viral condition attached.
Viral, like it spreads.
Yes. Any derivative works you create must remain under that exact same license.
Wait, let me make sure we define our terms here for anyone listening who isn't, waist deep in compiler logic. When we talk about sharing code, we usually mean the source code, right? The human readable text that a programmer actually types out.
Correct.
But when I download a commercial app, I'm usually downloading a compiled binary. Just a bunch of ones and zeros that my computer reads, but a human can't actually understand.
That's a crucial distinction. Think of compiling code like baking the cake. You can eat the cake, but you can't just look at the baked cake and easily reverse engineer the exact recipe.
Right. So under a copyleft license like GPL, it's not enough to just give someone that compiled binary.
No, it's not.
If I use your copyleft code to build my app and I distribute that app to users, I am legally obligated to also provide them with the complete human-readable source code. I can't hide my improvements.
That is the absolute core mechanism of Copyleft. You are forced to share your variation of the recipe. And if you're building a new project right now, this is the most critical initial choice you have to make.
Permissive versus copyleft.
Exactly. If you want maximum frictionless adoption of your code by as many people and corporations as possible, you look at permissive. But if your philosophy is that software must remain open, and you want to guarantee that any corporation that benefits from your work shares their improvements back with the community you belong in the Copyleft camp.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Let's zoom in on that permissive camp for a minute.
Okay, let's do it.
If my ultimate goal is maximum freedom and frictionless adoption, I'd assume I should just use the absolute simplest license available, right?
Looking at the sources, the MIT license and the BSD licenses, both the 2-clause and 3-clause versions, they are incredibly short and simple.
Oh, they're tiny. They are essentially just a few paragraphs. MIT, for instance, basically just requires you to keep the original copyright notice and include the license text if you distribute substantial portions of the software.
That's it.
That's pretty much it. No copyleft obligations. You don't have to open source your changes.
It's practically a sticky note that just says, have fun, please don't sue me.
Exactly.
And the BSD licenses are very similar in spirit, right? They allow free modification and commercial use. The 3-clause BSD just adds a no endorsement rule.
Right, the non-endorsement clause.
Which means if I use a university's open source code, I can't use that university's name in my marketing materials to imply they endorse my commercial product.
So, if MIT and BSD give users maximum freedom, why do major corporate players, think Google, or these massive cloud foundations, why do they insist on using the Apache 2.0 license?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because looking at it, Apache 2.0 is much longer and seems way more complicated. Does it just come down to lawyers needing to justify their billable hours?
It's very tempting to blame the lawyers, I know. But in this case, the complexity is actually a feature, not a bug.
Really? How so?
Simplicity isn't always safety, especially at an enterprise scale. The MIT and BSD licenses are great for small projects, but they're lacking in one crucial area that absolutely terrifies massive corporations.
Which is?
Patents.
Ah, patents. Okay. So we aren't just talking about copyright anymore. Let me see if I can articulate the difference here. Copyright protects the specific text of the code I wrote, like the text of a novel.
Right.
But a patent protects the underlying invention or the method the code is executing, right?
That hits the nail on the head. You can write a completely original piece of code, so you totally own the copyright. But if that code happens to perform a data sorting method that another company has patented, they can still sue you into oblivion for patent infringement.
Yikes.
Yeah. And under MIT and BSD, patent terms are not explicitly spelled out at all.
Oh, I see.
So a corporation downloading an MIT license library is always carrying this slight risk that the original creator might hold a patent on that process, and they could decide to spring a trap later.
That makes total sense. It's a massive financial liability for a big tech company. So how does Apache 2.0 solve that? Does it just say no patents allowed?
It does something much smarter. Apache 2.0 includes an explicit patent grant from contributors.
Okay, meaning what?
When you contribute code to an Apache 2.0 project, you are legally stating, I grant anyone using this software a free perpetual license to use any patents I hold that apply to this specific code.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it gives users absolute confidence they won't get sued by the creators.
That definitely provides some peace of mind. But our sources mention an even more aggressive clause in Apache 2.0, the patent termination clause.
Yes, this is the really clever part.
When I read that, it honestly sounded like a mutually assured destruction protocol. Am I interpreting that right?
Mutually assured destruction is the perfect way to describe it. The patent termination clause acts as a massive corporate shield. It states that if anyone, say, a big tech company using the software, decides to sue another entity over patent infringement regarding that specific software, their own patent protections under the Apache license immediately terminate.
Wait, wow. So if I use an Apache open source project and then I decide to act like a patent troll and sue the creators or other users,
You instantly lose your legal right to use the software at all.
my own product using that code becomes illegal overnight.
Exactly. It forces everyone to put their weapons down if they want to sit at the table. It creates a very safe, stable environment for large-scale collaboration, which is exactly why massive projects like Android use it.
That's incredibly smart.
It really is. Now, you do trade some of MIT's simplicity for this armor. If you use Apache 2.0 code, you have to clearly mark any files you've modified. And crucially, if the original project ships a notice file detailing specific attributions, you are legally required to distribute that notice file with your product too.
Okay, so if you are building frameworks or libraries and you want wide enterprise adoption, but you want to maintain a very clear legal safety net regarding patents, Apache 2.0 is the tool for the job.
Absolutely.
You allow corporations to keep their apps closed source, but you force them into this giant patent peace treaty.
Precisely. Now, let's completely flip the script. We've established how to let corporations use your code safely. But what if you absolutely do not want them absorbing your hard work into their proprietary products?
Right. What if I hate that idea?
What if you genuinely believe software should be a shared commons?
Then we have to transition over to the strong copyleft camp. This is where we look at the GPL, the GNU General Public License. This is the license that practically birthed the modern open source movement, right?
It is. The GPL forces openness. You can use and modify the software freely, but if you create a derivative work and distribute it, you must provide the complete corresponding source code.
You cannot hide your improvements.
Not at all.
And you have to license your new derivative work under the GPL as well. It's viral. It infects everything it touches with openness.
That's the goal.
But looking through our notes, I am spotting a massive modern loophole in how the GPL actually operates.
Oh, you found the sauce loophole.
Yeah. The legal trigger for having to share your source code is the word distribute. Under traditional copyright law, distribution means I hand a physical or digital copy of the software to you. I compile the app, put it on a disk, or let you download it. If I do that, I've distributed it, so I must share the source.
That is the historic legal trigger. Handing over a copy.
But wait, we live in the era of cloud computing now. What happens if a massive tech giant takes my GPL license database, completely guts it to make it twice as fast, but they never let anyone download it? They just run it on their own internal server racks in Virginia, and they charge customers a monthly fee to access it via an API or a web browser. They haven't technically distributed a binary copy to anyone's machine. Do they still have to share their brilliant proprietary speed improvements with the open source community?
And you've just identified what the industry calls the sauce loophole software as a service. And
Yeah.
to answer your question, under the standard GPL, no, they do not have to share their changes
That's crazy.
because copyright law is incredibly literal. Interacting with software over a network, viewing the output on a screen that does not legally constitute distribution.
That would be incredibly frustrating as the original developer. You chose the GPL specifically to force openness, and then a trillion-dollar company just uses a technicality in 1980s copyright law to keep their modifications completely closed.
It was a huge problem. It caused a literal existential crisis in the open source community. Companies were making billions off open source infrastructure without contributing a single line of code back. So to close this loophole, the community created the AGPL, the Afro GPL.
Okay, so how does it fix it? Does it just redefine the word distribution?
Not exactly. It adds a new trigger entirely. The sources describe the AGPL as a network copyleft license. It takes all the core rules of the GPL, but it states that if you modify the software and provide access to it over a network like a web service or a SaaS platform, you absolutely must offer the corresponding source code to the users interacting with that service.
So even if no user ever downloads a file, the mere act of letting them query the database over the internet triggers the copyleft requirement.
Exactly. The network interaction becomes the legal equivalent of distribution.
That is a massive distinction. So if you are building a server product today, maybe a backend analytics tool, and your primary fear is, say, AWS or another massive cloud provider taking your code, modifying it to run their proprietary cloud service, and completely freezing you out, the AGPL is your primary defense mechanism.
That's right.
It forcefully closes the sauce loophole.
It ensures network operators are held to the exact same standard of openness as traditional software vendors, which is why you see companies like MongoDB or Elasticsearch constantly wrestling with these specific network licensing issues.
Okay, so we've explored the absolute extremes here. We have Apache 2.0, which lets enterprises confidently close off your code in their products, and we have the AGPL, which forces even cloud providers to open up their code. But I imagine a lot of developers sit somewhere right in the middle.
The middle ground is incredibly common, particularly when you're building foundational tools or libraries rather than, complete applications.
Let me pitch you a scenario to see how this works.
All right, let's hear it.
Let's say I build a highly useful runtime library, a super fast physics engine for rendering gravity in video games.
Cool.
Now, I want massive adoption. I want proprietary, closed source, commercial games made by massive studios to use my physics engine.
Right.
But if that studio finds a bug and fixes it inside my library, I want that specific fix shared back with everyone.
Yeah.
I don't care if their game's storyline or character code remains closed source, but my physics engine needs to stay open and keep improving.
I see where you're going.
If I use MIT, they can keep their engine fixes completely hidden. If I use GPL, it forces them to open source their entire multi-million-dollar game, which means they'll just refuse to use my library in the first place. So where do I go?
For that exact scenario, you are looking for the LGPL, the lesser GPL. Our sources describe it as a weaker copyleft license, specifically engineered for this middle ground.
Weaker in what sense? Does it just have fewer legal teeth in court?
No. It's weaker in how far the viral copyleft effect is allowed to spread. And to understand how it works, we really need to talk about how software is assembled. The LGPL relies heavily on the mechanical concept of linking.
Linking?
Yeah. There are basically two ways a developer can use your physics engine: static linking and dynamic linking.
Okay, walk me through the difference.
Think of dynamic linking like a student referencing a textbook in a library. The student writes their essay. That's the proprietary game code. And occasionally the essay points to the textbook, your physics engine, to look up how gravity works.
Okay.
They're two separate entities running side by side. Static linking, on the other hand, is like the student photocopying the entire textbook and stapling it directly into the middle of their essay. It becomes one giant single document.
Okay, I track that.
Yeah.
Referencing versus photocopying. How does the LGPL treat them differently?
If a game studio dynamically links to your LGPL physics engine, meaning the engine remains a separate file on the computer that the game just calls out to, the copyleft effect completely stops at the boundary of your library.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. The game studio's application can remain entirely proprietary and closed source. They can sell it for $70 a pop and hide their source code.
But they get to use the open source physics. That's a huge win for adoption. But what about my requirement that they share bug fixes?
That's the brilliance of the LGPL. If they go into your physics engine code to optimize it or fix a bug, those specific modifications were made to the LGPL license component itself. Therefore, those changes must be released under the LGPL, and the source code for the modified library must be made available.
It perfectly draws the boundary line right at the edge of the library file. The game stays closed, the tool stays open.
Exactly. It completely balances commercial adoption with communal protection. It's the strategic choice for shared runtime libraries where you want to encourage a broad ecosystem of proprietary apps relying on your work while ensuring the foundational tool never gets monopolized.
This has been incredibly clarifying. We've taken this massive alphabet soup and turned it into actual strategy. Let's do a rapid-fire recap so anyone listening can make this decision for their own project right now based on their goals.
Not good.
If you want the absolute maximum adoption with zero copyleft friction and you don't really care about patent protections, choose the MIT or BSD licenses. It is the lowest possible barrier to entry.
Yep.
If you want that same permissive closed source use, but you need an enterprise-grade patent shield and clear attribution rules, especially if you're building frameworks or enterprise tools, choose Apache 2.0.
Spot on.
If you are building an application and you want to definitively force openness and prevent your code from being absorbed into proprietary software, choose the GPL. And if it's a server product and you need to definitively block the sauce loophole, choose the AGPL.
Right.
And finally, if you are building a shared library and you want proprietary apps to link to it dynamically, but you want the library itself to stay continuously open, choose the LGPL.
That is an excellent summary of the practical landscape today. And as a quick aside for the more technically minded listeners, remember that you aren't always locked into just one license.
Really?
Yeah, many successful companies use a dual licensing strategy. They release their code under the strict GPL for free, open source, community use, but they simultaneously sell a commercial permissive license to corporations who want to embed the code into closed source products without triggering the viral copyleft effects.
Oh, that's clever.
It's a way to monetize open source development directly.
Ah, so you can have your cake and sell it too, provided you hold the original copyright. I love that.
It is a very powerful business model. But before we wrap up today, I want to leave everyone with one final thought drawn from a very specific historical detail in our source notes.
Oh, lay it on me.
We spent a lot of time talking about how the AGPL was created to close a modern loophole, the shift from downloaded software to cloud services. But the sources also mentioned that when the original GPL was updated from version 2 to version 3 back in 2007, it specifically added protections against something called TiVoization.
TiVoization, like the old digital video recorders, the TiVo boxes.
Exactly like that. Kivo used the Linux operating system, which is GPL license, to run their boxes. And they complied with the license by releasing the source code for their modifications. But they engineered the physical hardware of the TiVo box so that it would only boot up if the software was digitally signed by the manufacturer.
Wait, so they gave you the open source code as required by the law, but they designed the hardware so you physically couldn't run your own modified version of that code on their machine.
Yes.
They complied with the letter of the open source law while completely violating the spirit of it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It was a hardware loophole. So GPL v3 was written with specific anti-DRM provisions and hardware lockdown clauses to fight this practice. It states that if you put GPL v3 software in a consumer product, you must provide the user with the necessary installation information or digital keys to actually run modified versions.
Wow. The legal cat and mouse game just never ends, does it? They closed the hardware loophole with GPL v3 and the network loophole with AGPL.
And this raises the ultimate question for you to ponder. We've seen licenses evolve to fight lockdown hardware, and we've seen them evolve to fight cloud monopolies. But look at where tech is heading today.
It's moving fast.
It is. Hardware is becoming increasingly integrated and locked down by default. Software deployment is moving almost entirely away from user machines and into massive, opaque cloud infrastructures, which are heavily governed by proprietary AI models now. Are these current legal frameworks going to be enough? Are the MITs and GPLs of the world sufficient to keep code truly free in the future? Or are we standing on the verge of needing an entirely new generation of software licenses to close the loopholes of tomorrow?